Ladies and gentlemen, we are in the Great Hall of the Institute of Technology in Zurich, Switzerland. As you have already read in the newspapers, a most amazing discovery has been made in this most peaceful of countries. It seems that Dr. Victor Frankenstein, once thought to be a character in a story, did actually exist and created what we have come to call his monster. The purpose of this meeting today is to hear, for the first time, the actual voice of the monster. Dr. Frankenstein made crude recordings of the monster's voice. The machine stands before us on the stage. It's a huge thing looking something like a bad dream out of a science fiction story. Two speakers are on either side of it. The recordings themselves are now being brought in. They look like oversized tape reels. A technician is now placing one on the machine. And Dr. Erroneous signals for silence. The lights are going down. The red indicator light on the machine has just gone on. And we are about to hear Frankenstein's monster speak for the first time.
What kind of a sick school is this?
Uh-oh, Dongo!
The plan. Strange things are afoot at the Circle K.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious, and don't call me Shirley.
You got spunk. I hate spunk.
Danger, Will Robinson. Danger.
Oh, righty then.
How you doing? Back off, man. I'm a scientist.
Don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry.
Say hello to my little friend.
I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
What are you people? On dope?
Stop whining.
I got a crap on deck that can choke a donkey.
Who is your daddy?
I'm sorry, but all questions must be submitted in writing.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
Can I do that?
I'll be back.
A dynamite! Show me the money!
Don't! Up your nose with your rubber hose.
A what?
I'm sailing! I'm sailing!
Groovy.
You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
Love means never having to say you're sorry.
Here's looking at you, kid.
We got no food! We got no jobs! Our pets' heads are falling off!
Come to the coast and get together, have a few laughs.
Hear that, Elizabeth? I'm coming to join you, honey!
I'm not a doctor, but I play one on TV.
I love it when a plan comes together.
What we do is if we need that extra push over the cliff, you know what we do?
Put it up to 11.
11, exactly. One louder.
Why don't you just make 10 louder and make 10 be the top number and make that a little louder?
These go to 11.
We're on a mission from God.
Hello and welcome to yet another fun episode of the Then Is Now podcast. I am your host, Re-Gor. We've got an amazing guest for you today, and we're going to have a lively conversation. And one of the things we're going to be talking about will be the topic of monster kids. Now, even if you don't know what a monster kid is, chances are, if you're listening to this podcast, you are a monster kid. We're going to have a conversation about that, among many other things that will you'll hopefully learn about. And maybe we'll be talking about stuff that you hadn't heard about before, and I think it'll be fun. So before we get into that, I get a little housekeeping here. If you are listening to this podcast, you may or may not be aware that it comes from a website called havenpodcasts.com. That's havenpodcasts with an S.com. Check us out there. We've got all kinds of fun stuff. We've got a new review show called Cinema Enigmatico, which is Italian for obscure movies. We also have a thing called Scary Stories, where yours truly reads scary stories to children. Also, we've got Ed's Monsters and Memories, Then Is Now blog. This podcast is there, as well as our other podcast, which is called The East Meets the West. And that's a show in which we discuss Shaw Brothers kung fu movies from the 60s and 70s and 80s. And even not kung fu movies. Shaw Brothers made over 900 films. And the second half of the show, we discuss spaghetti westerns, which are western movies that were made in Italy from the 60s to the 80s also. So if you're into those things, or you want to learn more about them, you want to go on a journey with us to discover the Shaw Brothers and spaghetti westerns, then check out The East Meets the West. Both of our podcasts can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and pretty much wherever you get your podcasts from, your favorite podcasts, you can find us. So check us out there, and don't forget to go to our website, havenpodcasts.com. Also, if you want to participate and give us your feedback on the show, you can email us here at thenisnow42@gmail.com. That's thenisnow42@gmail.com. Just be sure to put what episode you're referring to in the subject line. Also, we have another way you can communicate with us. If you would like to leave us a voicemail that we can play on the air, we have a number for you to call. It's 978-432-9079. That's 978-432-9079. So sit back, relax, get ready to learn some stuff because class is in session.
I have a bad feeling about this.
How could I possibly be expected to handle school on a day like this?
Food fight!
Hey, you in my class? I am today.
I think you should consider transferring to shop class. Now, very few students are severely injured in shop class.
Bueller.
When you were in school,
Bueller.
Did you ever cut class?
Bueller.
Yeah, I guess I did. Sure, most kids cut classes.
Good, sign this. Hey, Dick.
I get so lonely when I hear that third attendance bell ring and all my kids are not here.
7 years of college down the drain.
Fat, drunk, and stupid is no way to go through life, son.
We lack discipline. As long as I'm here, there will be no grades or gold stars or demerits. We're going to have recess all the time.
Woo!
Go, play, and have fun now.
And welcome back to Then Is Now. I'm your host, Re-Gor. On this episode, we have a very special guest. Now, this is someone who's been an inspiration to me and one of the reasons that you're hearing this very podcast right now. He's the author of Supernatural Solutions, the Mark Temple Case File series, the upcoming Solomon Group series, and the upcoming 6-week rotation series of superhero novels. As well as creating the Monster Kid Writer blog, he also runs four YouTube channels, including It's Pronounced Cook, Monster Kid Writer, Comicstalgia, and Monster Kid Radio. A podcasting legend, his resume includes former producer and co-host of Mail Order Zombie, producer and co-host of 1951 Downplace, one of my personal favorite shows, the voice and force behind the wildly popular, award-winning Monster Kid Radio, and he's most recently received the Silver Bolo Award from drive-in movie critic and host Joe Bob Briggs. He's a writer, producer, and all-around talented guy. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor and my privilege to introduce to you one of the hardest-working men in podcasting and internet history, Mr. Derek M. Koch. Welcome to the show, Derek.
I'm going to hire you to introduce every episode of Monster Kid Radio with that. That was great. I love that. Hey, I'm doing good, man. Thanks for having me. How you doing?
I'm doing well. You know, mired in technical stuff, but it's all fun.
That's why we do this, right? It's fun.
Exactly. So before we get too deep into things, I just wanted to kind of quickly go over the premise of this show, Then Is Now, is to sort of discuss pop culture of the past and its relevance today. That being said, a Monster Kid, as the name of many of your productions says, fits nicely into our discussions. Can you explain to those in the audience who may not know what exactly a Monster Kid is?
Sure. So I've kind of taken the traditional definition of Monster Kid and kind of evolved it a little bit. Originally, it referred to those folks, baby boomer types, that grew up watching creature feature, monster movies on TV on the afternoon, that sort of thing. They grew up with the Aurora models and the original run of Famous Monsters of Filmland and things like that. Well, I'm not of that generation. I'm more Generation X. So, you know, I'm not a first-generation Monster Kid, but I feel like I love these movies just as much, if not more so, than a lot of the people from that era. And I mean, that's why I call myself a Monster Kid. Sometimes I call myself Monster Kid X, just kind of blending the Monster Kid and the Generation X part of it. But originally, yeah.
That's awesome.
Originally, though, yeah, the Monster Kids were those who grew up watching this stuff on television, that sort of thing. They only had like 4 TV stations. They'd go to the drugstore, and on the spinner rack there'd be a Famous Monsters or some horror comic or something like that. These days, we have thousands of channels on the internet and access to so much material. YouTube and monster movies are everywhere if you know where to look. So that's kind of where I come in, I think.
So, yes, and I consider myself a Monster Kid as well. And, you know, I was going to ask you actually that question is, So, for example, you do the Luchador May.
Oh, sure.
You talk about the Santo movies. We all love Italian horror films. Does that also can other horror? I don't want to say genres, but other types of horror fall into the Monster Kid umbrella?
I would think so. I mean, I don't ever want to get into the point to where I'm like a gatekeeper and saying, well, if you don't like this, you're not a Monster Kid, or you have to like that, or, I think it's a little bit more dependent on your enthusiasm of the whole thing. One thing that I've learned and encountered over the years is that there's just something about the classic monster movies and the vibe that you get from these that inspires people to create, inspires people to connect and congregate in online or in conventions and that sort of thing. I think, yeah, if you like the luchador movies of the 70s and that's your bag, good for you. That's great. Come on in, Let's all get together and talk about the stuff that we love, and I'm sure we'll find some crossover.
Right, exactly. And so where did you grow up?
So my dad was military. We moved around a little bit. I was a military brat, Air Force brat. So I don't remember my time growing up in Arizona, which is where I was born, but my earliest memories are from Washington. Spent some time there, moved to Montana, and then ultimately Wyoming, where I probably consider where most of my growth happened as a person. And then from Wyoming, I went to film school in Montana, Bozeman, Montana State University. Did a couple of years there, didn't complete it for various reasons, and now I'm here in Oregon. So yeah, kind of all over the place.
Nice. That's awesome. And was there, how do I phrase this? Was there like a specific defining moment, maybe a movie or a book or a TV show that just sort of either it lit the bulb in your head to put you on the path to become a monster kid, or did you just wake up one day and go, holy crap, I'm a monster kid, I fit all this criteria, without really saying that out loud to yourself, but just sort of knew it?
Sure. Well, Generation X, grew up in the 70s and 80s. Star Wars was a huge thing, right? And I was a huge Star Wars fan before anything else. My earliest movie memories go back to Star Wars. I don't know how many times I saw those films theatrically or on video. I remember racing home from grade school because I knew Star Wars was going to be on TV like 5 minutes after school got out, so I had to run home to make sure I caught the beginning of it. So I was a huge Star Wars fan, and I think that probably opened the door for the geek level obsession that I started to have for all things sci-fi and fantasy and that sort of thing. To get a little bit closer to the monsters, my parents did not let me watch R-rated movies for whatever reason. It wasn't a religious thing. It was just, I wasn't a grown-up. I wasn't allowed to watch R-rated movies, which meant most horror movies were off the menu. However, if the movies were in black and white for whatever reason, those were deemed okay and somehow safe. So I ended up drifting towards some of these black and white movies, and then, of course, I stumbled across the Crestwood House books that were put out. I think they were released in the 70s. I'd have to double check. But they ended up in the kids section of the library, and each one of these books was about either a classic monster movie by itself or a subject within the classic monster moviedom, like mad scientists, that sort of thing. Or there might be a book about Frankenstein that would do a breakdown or a synopsis of the original Frankenstein film and then talk about the sequels and other movies and that sort of thing. And I think that's probably where I first encountered Peter Cushing, because his name got mentioned in one of these publications somewhere. But yeah, between those books and being okay and allowed to watch black and white monster movies, the groundwork was laid pretty early for me. This was in grade school, so I think it was always there. As soon as I stumbled across these books, it kind of confirmed that, yeah, this is who I am. And even if I kind of drifted away from it over the years, I always came back to it.
Right. I did the same thing, going to the library. I still have those Crestwood books. In fact, I've been reading them on my YouTube page for people in the, that are quarantined at home. But yeah, there was a plethora of amazing books when we were kids that told you all about the movie monsters, and you didn't necessarily have to watch them. But I remember my friends and I, we all knew who Peter Cushing was and Christopher Lee and Vincent Price, and it's kind of interesting. I wanted to touch upon, most of us monster kids all know that many of our idols, and probably most of them, particularly the horror icons, they've all passed away. You know, we used to be guaranteed every year that there'd be at least one movie with Vincent Price or Christopher Lee or Peter Cushing that would hit our theaters and drive-ins. And, you know, it was always something, I remember, something cool to look forward to. And we don't really have that anymore. We don't have actors that don't mind identifying themselves as horror stars. Do you think we'll ever see something like that again?
You know, I feel like we might have had like a good rush of that in the 80s. You know, Robert Englund, that the slasher subgenre, we had some people in there like Kane Hodder and those type.
Right.
But in terms of like today, man, I can't think of anybody that strictly identifies as a genre person or a horror person and loves it or thrives in it. For a while there, it felt like a lot of people would do the horror movies to get into Hollywood or into filmmaking and then get away from it as quickly as they could.
Right.
Because they didn't want to get, I don't know, anchored down by it or whatever. But, I mean, you do have people like the Robert Englunds and that sort of thing that
Lance
still
Henriksen.
do the cons and don't seem to mind being associated with... Yeah, exactly. And I think I just saw that Jamie Lee Curtis signed up to direct a horror movie for Blumhouse. So, I mean, you still have some people that keep going back to their horror movie roots, but, man, I don't know. There's no way we could have, like, another Peter Cushing or Vincent Price or anything like that. It's unfortunate because, I mean, we kind of need them, but...
Right. Absolutely. And
the ship may have sailed, unfortunately.
I know. It's really too bad. But so getting back to you.
Not to get too depressing, of course.
Well, on a lighter note, what led you to podcasting? And, you know, tell us about your journey. You started with Mail Order Zombie, right? And then went from there?
Yeah, so Mail Order Zombie was the first podcast that I did, that I produced. I've always been kind of the person that if there's something that I really, really enjoy, I want to be involved in it. Whether that's, you know, filmmaking, writing, fiction, very short period of time where I thought I was a rapper. And I just really loved listening to podcasts. There weren't a lot of them back when I first started. There was a handful of horror shows, but not a lot. And I really wanted to get involved. It sounded like something that I enjoyed doing, and I loved listening to them, so why not? But even though there weren't that many horror podcasts, there were still a handful, and I didn't want to just be another horror podcast guy. So I tried to find something that was a little bit more specific, something that I grew up loving, which were zombie movies. So I ended up launching the Mail Order Zombie podcast. There were only 2 other zombie podcasts at the time. One was more focused on the literary aspect, you know, zombie fiction and literature, and then the other zombie movie podcast at the time. So yeah, Mail Order Zombie came about, and the reason it was called Mail Order Zombie was because at that point, Netflix was still primarily a mail order service, and the approach I took was, if it's a zombie movie you have to get through the mail, whether it's through Netflix or you have to buy it through Amazon, that's what I'd cover, Mail Order Zombie. That eventually grew a little bit and expanded, but that's how I got started, was with that one. And then I just became obsessed with podcasting and haven't stopped.
So, all right.
Even when I took a small break from Mail Order Zombie, I kept going.
That's awesome, dude. And tell us about 1951 Downplace. That holds a personal spot in my heart because I really enjoyed that show, and you guys had a lot of chemistry on that show. First of all, where did the title come from?
So 1951 Downplace was a show that we started with, or that I started with Scott Morris from Disney Indiana and Casey Criswell from Bloody Good Horror. It was specifically Hammer films related, and 1951 Downplace, the title came from that being the original address of where Bray Studios was. Bray Studio being the hub, you know, really one of the main studios Hammer used during their heyday. So that's where the name came from. We had so much fun doing that. You said it holds a special place in your heart. It holds a special place in mine and Scott's and Casey's heart as well. That was a lot of fun to do, and I find myself missing it these days.
Yeah. And you pretty much covered all the Hammer films in that, correct? I mean, is there any more that you could do with it?
Oh yeah. There's still a handful. In fact, and Scott and I keep threatening to do this, we've got some episodes that we never finished. We had some computer issues. one of us had some medical issues, so he had to bow out. Casey had some problems; he had to bow out. He's fine. He was just massive kidney stones, but yeah, he's fine. In fact, we probably still have it. We haven't released it yet. We have a recording that we did about halfway through. Casey's like, "Okay, kidney stones coming, gotta go," and he just bows out. And that's the last time we ever heard from him. No, he's okay.
That's funny.
But no, there's still a lot to do. There's a list of movies that Scott and I still want to cover someday, and it's not like we're going to run out of Hammer material. There's a number of film wars that they did, right. The TV series that they did like 2 or 3 anthology series, and we always wanted to do Moon 02, like their one hard sci-fi film that was trying to cash in on Star Wars, and we never got around to it. So maybe someday.
Nice. I just watched that recently. Actually, it was on TV, I think. That's so cool. I really enjoyed it too, and I love the fact was it Scott who didn't know about Hammer films at all walking into it?
Yeah, he had maybe seen 5 Hammer films up until that point. And that was it. So it was a lot of fun to kind of take him. Not that, I was any kind of Hammer films master or anything like that, but Casey and I both had a little bit more experience in the genre than he did, or the subgenre than he did. And to have him along for like that new perspective that sometimes we as longtime fans forget about and don't have anymore because we've just become so accustomed to these films and watch them over and over and over again, to see Scott pick up on things that we had maybe forgotten or never saw to begin with because we're so not, for lack of a better term,
right.
jaded. We're so used to these things. To have him along for the ride, it was a lot of fun. That was a big part of the magic of Downplace.
And your promos were hilarious about him completely misconstruing the word hammer every time.
That was all him. Scott doesn't take enough credit for himself, and I wish he did. He's a funny guy. He's a great comedic writer, and man, that stuff was great. That was gold.
Funny. Now, what's your opinion of the Amicus films, which they were sort of rivals to Hammer around the time, at least in the late 60s, early 70s?
Oh, I love them. I think they're great. I'm a big fan of the Amicus stuff, and we always joked, and we never did it, and maybe someday, but we always joked that over on Downplace, maybe for April, we would do an episode where we were no longer 1951 Downplace, but we were whatever we came up with for an Amicus show instead, just to kind of put it in there for
that'd
April
be funny.
Fools, But yeah, no, the Amicus films are great. They're a lot of fun. I like the anthology format. You kind of get in there, you get 5 or 6 different stories, and you get out. But even their non-anthology films are solid. And of course, they use a lot of the same talent that Hammer did. So it's going to be quality. You got Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, doing what they do best.
Right.
So yeah, no, I love those movies, man. Dr. Terror's House of Horrors, personal favorite.
That's a great one. I have that on Blu-ray. And in fact, the very first movie I ever saw, and of course I'm going to date myself with this statement, was 1972. I was 2 years old, and I vividly remember, in fact, I posted this somewhere online recently. I vividly remember being in the back of my parents' car watching Asylum with Peter Cushing, the anthology film.
Oh, wow.
What was funny was my mother and we couldn't remember the name of the film, so she called it Chopping Heads. So for years, we would laugh about, remember that movie, Chopping Heads, that we saw at the drive-in? And then some way or another, I found it over the years, and I picked it up on a sidewalk sale at a video store on VHS, and it was just all, from there, just kept exploding.
That's amazing. I'd love to watch a movie called Chopping Heads starring Peter Cushing. That sounds great.
I'm telling you, man, I still have this vivid memory of the lady looking in the basement and the body parts wrapped in the meat paper moving on their own and the hand coming up behind her. And like that terrified the crap out of me. And I was 2 years old,
That's awesome.
All right, so
oh man, you mentioned
what?
Finding it at the sidewalk sale at the video store, man. That brings back so many memories. That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, video stores, that's another thing. They had a shelf life of 30 years maybe, most. And like my kids barely remember going to the video store.
Man, I worked at a couple of, I was an assistant manager at a video store. Because what else were film freaks going to do when you trying to get a job or whatever? As a teenager, early 20s, you're trying to get work, and all you do is love movies. So yeah, no, I worked at a Blockbuster. I worked at a video library, just tons of places. Yeah, that was so much fun. Those were the days.
Oh,
man.
That's funny. I worked at a Blockbuster as well.
So it's our fault they're no longer around. Is that what you're saying?
Probably.
Okay.
But what were you going to say about working at the video store?
Oh, it was actually through working at the video store that I discovered Hammer films. for the first time. We were doing some sort of local event. I don't remember what the event was for at the Blockbuster, but we had the local radio station show up, and the one guy there, man, I wish I could remember his name, but he was a radio DJ, and he was doing, live spots from the Blockbuster video. Between his spots, he and I ended up talking about horror movies, because he knew I loved horror movies, because, well, everybody did, because I wouldn't stop talking about them. And he mentioned Hammer, and I had no idea what Hammer was outside of fleeting memories of reading about Peter Cushing in some book somewhere. But I'd never seen any of the movies. I knew what they were, but that was about it. And he's like, okay, hold on a second. He ran home between his radio spots that he had to do, came back, and gave me 2 VHS tapes. And he said, watch these, get them back to me when you can. One tape was nothing but the Hammer Dracula movies, and one tape was nothing but the Hammer Frankenstein films. And they were recorded in that EP, SLP speed, so you can put like 8 hours of footage on a tape. Wasn't the best quality, but I didn't care. I mainlined those movies, and I was hooked, man. I was like, dude, this is amazing. So.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, if not for Blockbuster, I don't know if I'd be a Hammerhead, you know?
I hadn't heard that term before in that use.
Neither have I. Awesome. It just kind of popped out. I'm going to use that from now on. I like it.
That's great. Yeah, I worked at Blockbuster Video in my late teens as well, and it was, like you said, for those of us who, we've memorized all the TV show themes and all the actors' names. I mean, heck, I can't remember to take the trash out, but I can tell you who the third red shirt on the left on episode 5 of Star Trek was,
Oh, yeah. That's the important stuff, right?
Right. So, one of the things about this show then is now, it was sort of hatched out of this idea I had when my kids were born. I felt the need to bring them up to speed on all the cool stuff that they missed out on. And it really served them well. And, they're teenagers now and they've been going through school and they get almost all the references that the teachers make. Or if they're watching a show, like I remember my son watching SpongeBob going, hey, that's the good, the bad and the ugly, or that's Jaws, and stuff. So I feel like, doing this show, we can talk about things from the past and expose them to people that they may have missed out on, they may not have heard of, especially something like what we're talking about today, the Monster Kid and the Monster Kid Radio. So what is the goal of Monster Kid Radio? How did you go from the mail order zombie through 1951 Downplace to becoming Monster Kid Radio?
So part of it was, and I don't mind saying it now, it was a little bit of burnout with mail order zombie. I had done so many episodes, and every episode we typically reviewed anywhere from 2 to 3 zombie movies. And, I used to brag in all the press releases I'd put out or invitations to people to be on the show. We've reviewed over 500 zombie movies, TV shows, comic books, websites, novels, video games, even a zombie opera, all these different, just zombie all the time. And honestly, as much as I loved the George Romero films growing up, and Tom Savini was somebody that I idolized through high school, I just was getting tired of it. And then some other things kind of happened in my life that kind of made me reevaluate some things. My grandfather passed away, and for whatever reason, that just really signaled a shift for me,
right,
about the things that I really loved and the things that I like to celebrate and that sort of thing. I still watch the George Romero zombie films, and I still have a soft spot for a handful of the zombie movies that I watched back then. But
right.
Just they lost their appeal a little bit to me. Not that my grandfather was somebody that I associated with horror movies or monster movies growing up at all. We never talked about the content. No memories whatsoever regarding monster movies from my grandfather. But with his passing, it just kind of something in my head kind of shifted. So I ended up drifting away. There was some other drama stuff too, but whatever.
Right.
And it just, I was just ready to move on, but I loved podcasting so much. We launched my 1951 Downplace when we were taking a break from Mail Order Zombie, because I needed a break. I was hoping to maybe kind of recharge a little bit. So while we were on hiatus, we launched the Hammer Films podcast, and that just further fueled the fire for the classic stuff and kind of reignited my love for the Universals and the Roger Cormans and the Vincent Price films and Cushing and all this other stuff. And I just found that I was having more fun thinking about watching and talking about those movies than I did with the zombie movies anymore.
Right.
I will be forever grateful for everything Mail Order Zombie brought me. It brought me some incredible lifelong friendships and relationships. It exposed me to some wonderful films and filmmakers over the years, and it really helped me develop what I do now as a podcaster. But I am having so much more fun with Monster Kid Radio these days. And I'm so glad that I kind of hopped into this particular subgenre. I was inspired a lot by Vince Rotolo over at the B Movie Cast.
Yes.
You know, he seemed to be having so much fun doing what he was doing. I wanted to play too. And he was very supportive, and we always talked about having him come on to Monster Kid Radio. I always wanted that to happen because he was kind of like the guy, you know, that got everybody, you know, psyched about it. Unfortunately, with his passing, that's never going to happen. But I try to keep his spirit alive a little bit. In fact, I end every episode of Monster Kid Radio now by saying ciao.
Oh, nice.
Which is something that that's what he used to do.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's my way of honoring Vince a little bit. I don't know if I've really answered your question. I've kind of gone all over the place there.
Well,
but...
no, it's fine. You know, and it's just funny, or not funny, but it's interesting that you brought up Vince Rotolo too, because he's another one, much like yourself. I think I discovered you and Vince and Rod Barnett all around the same time. And
oh wow, there's a trio.
Yeah,
wow.
And it really just I was coming off a divorce myself, and I was just not in a good place, and I just discovered you guys, and that for me is why I'm doing this right now, is because I was inspired by you three to just, you know, talk about the stuff that we love and find an angle that hasn't been done. And it's clear that for you, Monster Kid Radio is sort of the culmination. While, you know, you covered zombie movies and then you covered the Hammer films, there's still such a wide range of things out there. There's so much. I mean, you could go on literally for decades doing Monster Kid Radio.
You know, I used to worry, actually. A couple of years ago, I started thinking, I'm going to run out of movies. It's not like they're still making movies from the 1950s. I mean, aside from people like Christopher R. Mim or Joshua Kennedy, there aren't new classic monster movies being made. But, you know, I don't think that's going to happen. Now that I kind of had that little scare for a moment, then I realized there are so many movies out there, and movies that I haven't seen yet that are part of that particular area
right.
of the subgenre. I love discovering new stuff, and even if I get to revisit something new or revisit something old, I get to take a new approach to it. There's just so much to really dive into, and it's so exciting for me to find something new to talk about. Even about an old classic or an old favorite like Creature from the Black Lagoon. You know, I can talk about that one for hours.
And that's
days.
That's your all-time favorite movie, right?
Oh, yeah, hands down. And it really was before I even fully embraced this Monster Kid part of myself. And I loved that film from the first time I saw it.
And it's up there in your heart with Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Wolfman, but he's just the man. The Gill Man is the man, right?
You know, there's just something about it. I mean, I love my Wolfman stuff too, and Frankenstein's monster. I love them all. I mean, ask me to pick my favorite kid. Okay, maybe I'll go with the Gill Man, but second favorite, I couldn't pick one.
You know, there's another podcaster, I won't name names, but he's actually had an interesting thing that he said about the Universal horror films. Is they're sort of like, they're reflections of people growing up. So, for example, Frankenstein represents infancy. You know, you're born into this world. You just want to be loved. You don't know about a lot. You're trying to find your way in the world. Then you've got the Wolfman, who represents adolescence. Your body's changing. You can't control it sometimes. Your emotions are out of control. And then you've got Dracula, where, you know, you grew up to be a man and you want to dominate women and you want to be suave and you want to be dashing and all that. And then you've got the Mummy, which represents old age, where you're kind of going back down again, you know. And I thought that was an interesting analogy for life in the Universal films.
That is interesting, something I hadn't considered. But yeah, it's an interesting take. I like that. I like that.
Yeah, it's really fun. So, all right, so on the show, I was looking at your website earlier, and I love going to your website because there's just so much to look at and do. But one of my favorite things is, and when I'm listening to your show, especially when you have a guest on that hasn't been on before, you pull out this deck of cards. Now,
oh yeah,
you know, here then is now, we're a rinky-dink nickel and dime operation, so our budget can't afford fancy things like cards. Can you tell the audience the meaning and the purpose of your much vaunted cards?
So I think you're talking about the Classic 5 cards.
The Classic 5, exactly.
And I know that's probably not the most original or creative name, but it just is what we started using, and it kind of stuck. I wanted to do some sort of like icebreaker type game on the show, and it just kind of evolved from there. The Classic 5 is a card game that we play on every episode of Monster Kid Radio when I remember. There have been a few times I've forgotten lately, and I regret it, but the Monster Kid Radio Classic 5, it's a stack of cards. Each one of these cards has a this or that, which movie do you prefer style question. For example, I just picked one up out randomly right now. The question is, what is your favorite man in ape suit or man in gorilla suit movie? So it's questions like that, just to kind of get people talking. Like I said, icebreaker type questions, and of course these games always lead into conversations, sometimes much longer conversations about the movies that we love so much.
Right, and it's awesome. That's one of my favorite parts of your show.
Oh, good.
I
Thanks,
look forward
man.
to that. Yeah, no problem. In fact, that sort of, in a roundabout sort of way, inspired me because I have a 3-year-old grandson, and we watch the classic horror movies, and I was quizzing him on the actors and the monsters and all that. So I finally made my own set of flashcards. So for example, on one you'd have Dracula on the front and a picture of Bela Lugosi on the back with their names.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and I made them for him so that he's like a master, and he's 3 years old, and he's a master of Lon Chaney Jr. and Lon Chaney Sr. and Claude Rains,
That's incredibly awesome. That's so cool.
Yeah, it's really fun. And it's just, because I was thinking about your cards and the questions, and I'm like, how can I incorporate that into teaching him about what he needs to know? Because that's what we're here to do, man, is we've got to, tell everybody about these movies and show them to them, because they're not going to seek it out on their own. There's 500 channels and 20,000 streaming services,
And I think probably when we were younger, we may have fantasized about how great it would be if there was all these channels with all the stuff that we could watch. But now there's so much. It's kind of overwhelming, and a lot of the stuff that we love gets drowned out by the newer and flashier stuff. So, yeah, between what I do and the various podcasters, the various horror hosts, doing their thing,
right,
various YouTube channels these days, what you do, it helps to keep this stuff alive and keep it going, because sometimes they're even more relevant to what's going on in the world today than the current horror.
Absolutely. And what is your opinion of the current crop of horror movies that have been coming out?
So I don't watch a lot of modern horror much anymore. They just don't have the appeal to me that they used to. So much of it, I feel like, is because it's all flash and lots of CG. And I don't want to be one of these guys that's like, oh, it's CG, it's terrible. But to me, there's always a texture to something that is real, meaning that if it's something that I know that I could go visit or hold in my hand and not just have to imagine it being on a computer, it just feels better to me. And a lot of the horror movies now have so much CG in them, there's this weird disconnect for me. And maybe that's just me being older, and maybe that is I don't like CG kind of approach, but I just want that tactile inference with some of these films that I don't get anymore. That said, give me a really good spooky movie. Yeah, it doesn't matter what the technology is, if it's a CG or a model or whatever. I just don't find a lot of joy in a lot of the movies anymore. And that's one of the things that Universal, I felt like, brought. There was always a sense of wonder and joy. And yeah, maybe, everybody gets killed at the end by the monster, but there's still a sense of wonder to it.
Right, exactly.
It didn't feel so depressing and bleak that you get with a lot of movies these days. Man, I don't want to come off as like an old fuddy-duddy. It's like, oh, get off my lawn. I don't like these current movies with your flash bang, whatever. But they just don't speak to me the way that some of the older movies do anymore.
And to your point about CG versus stop motion, I think it was Roger Ebert who said, stop motion looks fake but feels real. CG looks real but feels fake.
Yeah, that's he's spot on right there.
Yeah.
There were some things that I disagreed with him about, but I would agree with him there with that. Yeah, for sure.
Right. And it's just too bad. I mean, in my adult life, there was one horror movie called Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer with Michael Rooker. And a buddy of mine and I went and saw that in the theater, and we were terrified to go to the car. It was that scary.
Sure.
We will return after these brief messages.
Prepare for a spine-tingling, nerve-shattering podcast featuring all your favorite monsters. You won't believe your ears when you listen to Monster Kid Radio. Hear your host, Derek M. Koch and his ever-rotating stable of guests discuss your favorite classics and sometimes not-so-classic monster movies. Subscribe to Monster Kid Radio through iTunes or Stitcher, or visit monsterkidradio.net before the next weekly episode of Monster Kid Radio. Go through the archives for interviews with Sarah Karloff, Victoria Price, and Joel Hodgson. Listen to discussions about movies like Creature from the Black Lagoon, Island of Terror, and King Kong. And don't forget convention coverage from Monster Bash and the H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival, Classic Monsters, Modern Talk, and the Head of Rondo Hatton, only on Monster Kid Radio.
Well, howdy, partner. How can I help you today? I'm looking for a movie to watch, but What in tarnation was that? Never you mind, son. Now let's focus on your needs here. I'm looking for something to watch, but I want something I ain't seen yet. Ooh, watch yourself there, partner. Well, I reckon you come to the right place. You've come to the place where the East meets the West. The East meets the West? Where's that, and how's that going to help me? Ooh, that was close. You better duck. I don't understand what's going on here. It's like I'm in a place where Kung Fu and cowboys have combined somehow. Well, that's right, partner. You're going to find some offbeat films here, no doubt about that. Host Re-Gor is going to take you on a journey to discover not only the hundreds of amazing martial arts films of Hong Kong's Shaw Brothers, but also Italy's spaghetti westerns. Spaghetti westerns? Is that some kind of joke? No, sir. Western movies made in Italy from the 60s to the 80s are called spaghetti westerns, and that's a fact. You can find The East Meets the West on all the major podcasting apps, as well as havenpodcast.com. Well, thank you kindly, sir. You done settled my entertainment needs, even though it was a tad dangerous in your store. Like I said, go to your podcasting apps or go to havenpodcast.com. The East meets the West. Your new favorite ranch to hang out at. And now, back to more insanity on Then Is Now. And then another one that pops up to my mind is a movie called The Descent, which was from a few years ago about these ladies that go cave exploring, which remind me never to go cave exploring. And another friend of mine and I were watching it, we were screaming like little schoolgirls through the whole movie. And this was about 10 years ago.
Yeah, no, and my wife, she likes to watch some good scary movies too, but her standards are a little different than mine.
Yeah,
I won't say they're better, but her standards are a little different than mine. And I find that if it's a horror movie that my wife enjoys, it's one that I enjoy too. And maybe she's kind of brought me up a little bit in terms of that. Yeah. Now I just won't watch anything that comes across.
Right.
But yeah, we watched The Descent. The Descent's great. It's good and spooky and scary, and it relies so much more on mood than gore.
Exactly.
Even though there's some good effects work in it too.
Yeah.
And you can kind of, and I talk about this on Monster Kid Radio too. As somebody who thought he was going to be a filmmaker when he grew up, I like seeing movies where I know how some of these things were done. I like that DIY aesthetic that you see in a lot of these movies, and you see that in The Descent, knowing that. They really didn't have a big cave system to shoot in.
Right.
They had a set, maybe no bigger than a big garage, that they just kept changing the walls back and forth to make it look like we're moving to a different part of the cave. I get that. And there's something about that speaks to me on a subconscious level, whether I'm consciously aware of it watching the movie or not, just knowing, there's a part of me knowing what they did to get to that point and seeing their success at it, that really gets me going.
Right. That's awesome. But my point about that was that a lot of these modern movies, it's few and far between when they're genuinely scary. It's really the older films I find scary. Like a lot of the old Italian films I find, like Demons and Demons 2. I can't watch those alone. I have to have the lights on and somebody else in the room.
I haven't watched those movies in a while, but yeah, I remember Demons in particular being particularly unsettling.
Yeah.
For sure.
Absolutely. So on Monster Kid Radio, you play a lot of surf rock, which I love.
Oh, yeah.
I've always loved surf rock. How did that come about when you were in the process of sort of choosing what style of music to put together for the show?
I have no idea. I wish I could give you a solid answer, and I've been asked this before. There is something natural about combining surf rock and 50s monster movies, and 60s especially, and I don't know if it's because the opening theme song from the Munsters feels a little surfy in spots. I don't know what it is, but there's just a nice blend there, and I'm learning as I talk to a lot of the surf musicians, they love the monster movies too. They're inspired by them. They use monster art for their album covers. There's just something about the blend, peanut butter and jelly, it's the perfect Reese's peanut butter cup. I don't know what it is, but they just go well together. And I love finding new surf bands to play on the show. And I found some bands that I absolutely adore. I'd probably put in my, if I were to list a collection of my favorite musicians of all time, I'd put some of these surf bands in there because they're wonderful.
Yeah.
It's just a blend. It's just a magic, man.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so good. I really enjoy that aspect of the show too. And it seems like you sort of have, a never-ending list of new bands that come out.
Yeah, so that's actually something that I do about once a month. Is I'll go on like a half a day tear on the internet looking for bands that I've never heard of or have new albums coming out, that sort of thing. And then I just ask them flat out. It's like, hey, I love the album. Can I play some of it on the show? And most of the time, it's a yeah, sure, no problem. I've only been turned down like 2 or 3 times over the years, which I'm blown away by. That's awesome. That's actually happened. That so many bands are excited to be on this show. It's getting to the point now to where some bands, like we just played a song from Beware the Dangers of a Ghost Scorpion. They reached out to me and said, hey, we got this new album coming out. You've played us in the past before. We love the support. You want to do this one? Like, yeah, I'm all in.
That's
Let's
awesome.
do it.
That's so good.
So, yeah, it's great. And that's one of those bands that I was talking about, that if I had to put a list of my top 5 bands or whatever, they're right up there.
Right.
They're really good bands. So check them out, people. You can find so many of these bands on places like Bandcamp. You get a lot of the independent musicians, and you look there and just type in surf, and you're going to find so much.
Nice. That's so good. Everybody's going to be typing away after this.
Oh, yeah. Dangers of a Ghost Scorpion. Cannot recommend them enough.
Awesome.
So good.
That is so cool.
And they're not paying me for this.
When you think about all the episodes that you've done, I mean, you've got what, like almost 500 Monster Kids, correct?
Oof. Yeah. It's a lot. We've been going for just over 7 years now.
Wow.
Which is insane to me.
And Mail Order Zombie was like 4 years, wasn't it?
Yeah. When I realized it was 7 years, it really took me aback, because I've always kind of viewed what I do on Monster Kid Radio as always being like a shorter amount of content than what I did with Mail Order Zombie. Mail Order Zombie felt like this big juggernaut that I produced and put out into the world and then started over. And I still am having a hard time wrapping my monster head around the idea that I have more Monster Kid Radio than Mail Order Zombie out there in the world now.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. So when you think about all the episodes of all the different shows that you've done, are there any that stand out in your mind as incredible? Any particular guests that were just spectacular?
That's hard. Because one of my favorite things about podcasting in general, whether it's with the Zombie Show or Downplace, or Monster Kid Radio or anything else that I've tried to do, is it's always either brought to my life new relationships or strengthened existing relationships. And as much as I love the movies and I love talking about these movies, my favorite part of podcasting in general is just meeting people and talking about a shared interest and learning from each other. So it's hard to say I have this favorite guest on Monster Kid Radio, because so many of them have a different, unique point of view that doesn't necessarily align with mine, but it allows me to grow and learn.
Right.
And that's something that I really love doing, is learning, and just kind of experiencing these things from other points of view. It's hard to say, but I will say one of my absolute thrills with Monster Kid Radio was meeting people like Victoria Price, who's Vincent Price's daughter. Sarah Karloff, who's Boris Karloff's daughter.
Nice.
And then the late, great Julie Adams.
Yes.
I met her a few times. And that would not have happened if not for Monster Kid Radio.
Right. Right, absolutely. I mean, did you ever, when you meet some of these famous people, do you kind of have a little bit of fan geeking out by accident? Like, you don't mean to, but you're starstruck?
Oh, yeah. And oh boy. The first time I met Julie Adams, and I met her a few times over the years. The first time I met her was at a Monster Bash years ago. It was the first Monster Bash I went to, and I must have lost a good 20 pounds in just fanboy sweat standing in line to meet her because I was so excited to chat with her. And wow, that was a moment. I feel like I've gotten a little better about this over the years, but I still have that little fanboy inside of me, that little Derek going, oh my God, we're going to talk to the creature from the Black Lagoon. When I talk to Rico Browning or something like that, it's just, oh boy. Now, as I talk to them more, I realize, hey, they're just people like me, and they're cool too, and we can hang out. Like, I've met with Victoria Price several times over the years, and she's great. I mean, she's a person. She's just a person. But I still geek out a little bit, thinking, hey, that's Vincent Price's daughter you're talking to.
I remember I was at the Horror Hound a few years ago, and I had the chance to meet Joe Bob Briggs, and I was so terrified. My buddy had to drag me over to him because I was too afraid.
That happened with me actually. When we first moved to Portland, Oregon, we didn't realize that Portland was such a comic book heavy town. Lots of comic book creators and stores and all that. And there's a lot of local conventions. And my wife and I went to one. And for whatever reason, Brink Stevens was at this little mini convention in Portland, Oregon.
Wow.
I don't know why Brink Stevens was there. Scream Queen Brink Stevens. Yeah. I guess she had a comic book, but I knew who she was, but I was terrified to go talk to her. 'Cause I don't know why. It's not like she's particularly an intimidating person. She's a sweetheart once you get to talk to her.
Right.
So my wife actually brought me up and said, my husband wants to meet you, but he's too afraid to say anything. And then they ended up talking about their mutual love of coffee, for what of all things. So yeah, I've had that same experience.
That's a riot. It's so awesome what you do because you get to meet people like that. Did you ever get to meet Forey Ackerman?
No, I wanted to. It would have been amazing, but yeah, I never had the chance. Had you?
No, we corresponded via email back in the early 2000s, just for a little bit. I sent him a picture of my son with a Famous Monsters magazine, and he loved it, and he was like, I can't wait for you guys to come visit, and I'll give your son a kiss on the cheek. And it just never happened, and then unfortunately I was gonna go to what's the convention in Virginia there? The Monster Bash, I think.
Well, Monster Bash is Pittsburgh. But there's a big one in Virginia.
Yeah, it was one of those. It was one of those ones, and Creepy Classics hosted it.
Yeah.
And he was going to be there, and for whatever reason, I couldn't go. I couldn't get down there that weekend, and he'd passed away after that, and I was so bummed.
Yeah, that is the one downside to what I do now with Monster Kid Radio. With Mail Order Zombie, you can get people that work on the zombie movies today. You can get current filmmakers or people who worked on the movies in the 80s, that sort of thing.
Right.
You can talk to Tom Savini if you can get his attention. You can talk to Lloyd Kaufman, which was just weird. At the time, I could talk to George Romero before he passed.
Right.
But with Monster Kid Radio, it's so hard because we don't have them. Like you were saying earlier, we don't have those icons the way that we used to. So many of them have gone on, and all we have are the movies and anything they left behind. We can't really talk to Vincent Price or Boris Karloff or Bela Lugosi.
Right.
Maybe you can talk to their kids, but that's about it.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's the one downside, I guess, to MKR.
Right. But at least, it's putting it out there for people to rediscover them as time goes on.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, and it's so important, I feel like, to keep these things going. Not just because they're great films, but the history behind them, man. You look at the Universal horror cycle, that's not just horror movies. That's the history of Hollywood right there.
Right.
And Hollywood doesn't do a very good job of keeping their own history, so we have to do it by celebrating these films.
Exactly. It was funny when leading up to this interview, I was describing you to my wife, trying to tell her who you were, and I explained that you were out there doing the Lord's work with Monster Kid Radio, spreading the word of everything.
I like to think of it as doing Godzilla's work.
There you go.
Okay, all right. There you go.
So now, obviously, you're much more than just Monster Kid Radio. You're also an author, as I mentioned in the intro, and I think you've got even more books out than what I had briefly touched upon. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so going back to what I said earlier about, when I find something that I love, I want to get involved. And I loved reading as a kid and have been reading nonstop ever since. And so I wanted to contribute. I wanted to be a writer because I loved reading, and why not? So I've been poking around with pencil and paper since grade school, and finally decided to make a real go at it last year when I released my first collection of short stories featuring my Monster Hunter character. You mentioned it earlier, the Supernatural Solutions series, Monster Hunter for Hire. It's a collection of short stories about a particular monster hunter named Mark Temple, and he gets hired out to take care of various supernatural problems, whether it's a vampire in the basement or an airplane, a werewolf on the side of the road, a zombie, whatever. You call Mark Temple and he takes care of it for you.
That's awesome.
There's a small fee, but his prices are negotiable, so it's okay.
That's great.
But I love writing, and I've got that done. Like I said, that is a collection of short stories. You can find it over at, if you don't mind, a little plug, marktemple.com. Marktemple.com, and that's Mark with a C. Will take you to the Amazon link where you can pick it up for yourself as either a Kindle edition or an Undead Tree edition if you want a print version. There is a collection in the works. I'm hoping to have it done by the end of the year of more short stories featuring Mark. The character seems to have resonated with some folks. So, and I love the guy. He's been living in my head for over a decade. So to actually get his adventures out on paper has been great. So that's coming up. But right now, that's the one book that I have available. But there are several in the works.
Right.
Some that I'll be self-publishing or independent publishing. And then I do have a book coming out from Pro Se Productions later this year, I think, depending on what their schedule's like, and that's coming up soon too. I can't really talk too much more about that, but I have signed the contract, so we'll leave it at that.
Cool. That's awesome. Good for you, man. And I could be mistaken, but I thought I saw your name on a book with Steve Sullivan. Was it White Zombie adaptation?
Yeah. So I have done some introductions for some people, and I did write the introduction to Steve Sullivan's novelization of White Zombie, so you can see that there. I've written a few pieces that have been published in some of my friends' work. Dr. Drek put out a couple of books. He's a horror host, and I've contributed some essays to some of those. I will be contributing something to an upcoming Jim Beard collection later this year as well. So yeah, I've done a few pieces here and there contributing to people's work as well. And Steve asked me to do the White Zombie introduction because of my mail-order zombie background, and I was more than happy to do it.
Right. That's awesome. And now how does the Monster Kid Writer website fit into the grand scheme of things?
So that's originally was going to be where I put all my writing stuff. I haven't really updated that site in a little while, so there's not a lot of current material there. It needs to be updated, and I do have some plans to get that dusted off a little bit later this year. But yeah, that's primarily where I want to put most of my writing side of stuff. So my Mark Temple collection's there, the book I've got coming up with Pro Se, just basically anything that I'm doing writing-wise is going to end up over at monsterkidwriter.com.
So tell us about your YouTube pages now. It looks like you've got 4 of them. How do you handle all that with everything else that you got going on?
Well, I don't, is the thing. So I have the creatively named Monster Kid Radio on YouTube channel. And right now that is primarily the YouTube depository for all the Monster Kid Radio episodes. So when you download an episode of Monster Kid Radio, you can get it through iTunes, through the Monster Kid Radio website over at monsterkidradio.net. Various podcast directories have it, or you can go to YouTube and listen to an episode there. There's really not a visual component to the podcast. I think the cover art for the episode is just what you see when you play a YouTube video from there. But if you want to listen to your podcast on YouTube for whatever reason,
nice.
There you go. Every once in a while, I'll upload a non-podcast episode to that channel. But I haven't done that in a while, and I do have some things in the works. So if you're a YouTube user, please consider subscribing to that YouTube channel. Really easy to find. The other YouTube channels, the It's Pronounced Koch YouTube channel is where I'm going to put a lot of my non-monster stuff. I know it might sound like heresy, but man cannot live on monster movies alone. I know. Don't tell anybody, but no. I love other things. I love we talked a little bit about the writing, and there are other things that I have some passionate feelings about, and I will be putting some more stuff up there. I've really kind of found myself falling deep into the Lego community of all things.
Oh, wow.
So I'll be putting a lot of Lego material and content over at It's Pronounced Koch, as well as a few other things here and there. So that's where that's at. And then you mentioned 4 channels. What are the other 2? Comicstalgia?
Yes.
So I had grand plans for Comicstalgia, and actually I'm putting that back on the schedule now. I grew up loving comic books. I think like a lot of monster kids and geeks of our ilk and nature, right. we loved comics growing up, and over the years I kind of drifted away from them. Just kind of financially it became a thing. It's like, they're so expensive now.
Oh my God.
They don't feel so epic anymore. I remember distinctly, man, I would pick up a Chris Claremont X-Men comic in the 80s, and I'd read it in half an hour. I'd go by, and I'd still be reading the comic because it was just so great and dense and so much stuff going on. Now you read a comic in 5 minutes.
Right, yeah.
And it's like it just doesn't seem as fulfilling. So I kind of drifted away from it. But with the MCU films and all that, it kind of reawakened my comic nerd. So Comicstalgia is where I do plan on doing more exploration and deep diving into my fandom as a comic book kid growing up and kind of re-engaging with that. I was going to launch this last year, but then some things kind of got in the way. Everything's fine now, but I had some mental health stuff, so I wasn't able to really commit to it. But later this year, I'll be relaunching the series that I call Reading the Avengers, where I'm going to read every single issue of every single Avengers comic and all their spin-offs, and then do little short YouTube videos about every single one of them.
That's awesome.
And when I told one of my I'm looking forward to it, especially now that you can read almost all those Avengers comics legally online and not spend all the money for it. I told one of my friends about that, though, and he's like, dude, you can't just do one comic and a YouTube video. I was like, why? Why not? Because you'll be doing YouTube for like 50 years to get it all in. It's like, well, I'll see what happens. So, yeah, that'll be starting up here later this year as well. So, yeah, let's see this. That's 3. What was the 4th one you asked me about? Because I have a few that I've started but then didn't. Was it the Monster Kid Writer channel?
Monster Kid Writer, yes. That was the 4th one.
Yeah. So the Monster Kid Writer channel is in the works right now. I want to turn that into like an interview kind of channel where I'm talking with other Monster Kid creators and writers, like trying to get some things worked out where I can have Stephen D. Sullivan come on to do like a little back and forth, either Google Hangout or YouTube chat with him, that sort of thing. I want to do like little interviews kind of promoting various Monster Kid creators and writers, because I think it's important for Monster Kids to support other Monster Kids.
Absolutely. Like I said, you're doing the Lord's work. You're doing Godzilla's work, man. So, one other thing I wanted to bring up was I know that you've talked about Universal's attempted Dark Universe quite a bit.
Okay.
What is the final outcome with that? Was this last Invisible Man movie, was that the death knell of the Dark Universe or the beginning of something they're attempting?
So, boy, how much time do you have?
As much time as you, man.
Universal just can't seem to figure it out. Maybe they have now. Maybe they're on the right path now, but they've tried to relaunch their Universal shared universe so many times over the years now, and I think the closest they got was probably The Mummy. And if not for a few things that happened with that, it might have been the beginning of something great. Who knows? My understanding now is that there is no longer a unified Dark Universe initiative at Universal. And maybe I'm wrong, and listeners of this podcast, if you know any different, I'd love to know, because, I have a vested interest in the Universal monsters, but my understanding is that Universal is now working with smaller production companies to have them pretty much do their take on the Universal monsters. They don't necessarily have to overlap or interconnect or have a shared universe. So with The Invisible Man, which actually I thought turned out okay.
I haven't seen it,
The Invisible Man was kind of like, it's all right. I have some issues with the actress, Elizabeth Moss, but overall, I thought it was pretty good. As a performer, she's fine. As an actress, she's great. I just have some weird associations with her that anyway, longer story.
Oh, is she the one that was in Handmaid's Tale?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
That's her. Yeah, and she's great in that, too. There's just something about that film that, like I said, it's not bad. It's actually pretty good.
Huh.
And I was glad to have watched it, but it doesn't have that same sense of whimsy as the original Invisible Man did. But then I knew going into it wasn't going to.
Right.
But yeah, so my understanding is that with that movie being as successful as it was, and it didn't have to hit the same marks that The Mummy did with Tom Cruise because it wasn't nearly as expensive to produce, that Universal is going to go ahead and move forward with these smaller productions. Again, they're not going to be interconnected films, unfortunately, but my understanding is that there's a Bride of Frankenstein potentially in the works.
Right.
A Monster Mash movie, for whatever reason, is in the works. An Invisible Woman in the works. So who knows?
Oh, interesting.
I don't think we're going to see that shared universe the way that we wanted to, but maybe you just can't capture that magic again.
No. Well, I mean, you need someone like a Joss Whedon, someone like yourself who is so in tune with these films and grew up with them, knows what needs to be done. You know, rather than a bunch of suits sitting around a table going, well, let's turn The Mummy into an action movie and we'll have comedian Brendan Fraser be the lead. You know, it's like, what? No.
Well, you know, so the Brendan Fraser Mummy films, they weren't awful. I mean, they had some abysmal CG effects, especially the second one. God. Oh, my. With The Rock, I mean, come on, that was, oof. Yeah. But, you know, they're not bad. They're fun rides. They're romps. And they never try to get any bigger than they are. You know, they know what they are. Whereas with the Tom Cruise The Mummy, I think they really... Man, they missed the boat so hard on that. They tried, and there are some elements in it that I kind of like, some ideas that I kind of like, but, man, they really missed the mark on a lot. And I think part of it's because they wanted to turn it into an action movie. They put Tom Cruise in it, and it had to become a Tom Cruise vehicle as opposed to a Mummy vehicle. And that's not the approach you want to take.
Right, exactly.
I feel like.
You know, and then something about Stephen Sommers, I just don't like his bombastic filmmaking methods.
You know, no, that's valid, man. I was not a fan of Van Helsing. I wanted to like it because I knew he was a monster kid. And if you watch some of the behind the scenes or interviews with him that came out around that time that Van Helsing came out, he talks on and on and on about how much he loved watching these movies with his dad, and he made these movies for his dad. And I thought, well, that's cute. You know, that's sweet. That's great. He gets it. And then all the CG, and then all the, like you said, the bombastic, over the top, flashbang. It's all sizzle, no steak, man.
Right, and that's the thing too. It's like, you know, Van Helsing is one of those movies that I think it's awful. I would never recommend it to anyone. However, once in a while, I enjoy watching it, even though there are things like the Wolfman's human. And then, oh, the cloud moves, there's the moon. Oh, now he's a wolf. Oh, the cloud went over the moon. Now he's a human again. It's like, no, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, you know, and I always go back and forth because on the one hand, these stories, they have to change and kind of grow over time, right? They have to evolve a little bit. But these are icons. These are staples, man. You can't have a vampire walking around outside just because it's cloudy and now they sparkle.
Right.
I mean, there are certain things about these tropes that have, you know, very specific rules that identify them as vampires, werewolves, or whatever.
Right.
Van Helsing's got some great music.
Yes.
Alan Silvestri did the score to that, and it's wonderful.
Yeah.
And it's got some neat set pieces, and, you know,
but it's just
Kate Beckinsale in a leather corset. I mean, that's great too, you know, but yeah, it's kind of missing something.
So when we're talking about, say, the Universal classics and the Hammer films, so the Universals will say roughly the 30s to the 50s, and then Hammer was the 50s through the 70s. Do you think that both sets of monster movies have equal footing in the modern world? Do they hold up with today's audience?
I'm biased, so of course I'm going to say yes. But I think you're probably going to have an easier time introducing somebody to these movies by going through the Hammer route. Just because they're in color, there's a little bit more blood, there's a little bit more sex, and it's an easier sell, I suppose.
Right.
It's closer to what we see now in modern filmdom, despite all the gothic trappings you really don't see a lot of anymore, at least done successfully. But that said, man, I love what you said earlier about the Universal movies being, you know, the Frankensteins, the Adolescents, and the Wolfman and the Dragon. Yeah. I love that. That's great. And I see that more being relevant than a lot of the stuff that's happening in Hammer. I love my Hammer films, don't get me wrong. But yeah, I think Universal has the opportunity to have more metaphor.
Right.
And man, it's just more history too. And that
I told that whole thing to my son one time, and he said, and what's the Gill Man when you join the high school swim team?
Now, the Gill Man would probably be when you finally, end up with the girl that you've been dreaming of over for a long time, and then some high school jock comes and steals her away from you.
Kick sand in your face.
Yeah.
The Creature, though, that really is one of those awesome movies that just sticks with you, especially if you watch it at a young age. It's like the Gill Man and the Wolf Man. They just kind of leave this impression, at least on me, in terms of how awesome they are.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you watch them at just the right time. Like you said, with what you were saying earlier, the analogy, the Wolfman, your body's changing. You don't really have control over it, that sort of thing. You watch these movies as a male adolescent, and yeah, they're going to speak to you, man. They're going to really get inside you and make you think.
Yeah.
It's good stuff.
Absolutely.
And maybe help you cope.
Right. And speaking of coping and thinking about the future, we've got this coronavirus thing going on. Most of us are quarantined, or we don't really leave the house all that much anymore. But I see a silver lining in this. I see the drive-in theaters starting to make a comeback. Do you think this is going to be a true renaissance of the drive-in? Are they going to be making movies specifically for it like they used to?
I don't know. I would love to see more drive-in specific type movies come out. I don't know if they have the same place in the community that they did back in the 50s and 60s when they were really kind of thriving with that drive-in type of movie. They have to bring in the big movies, the big budget films to get the audiences to come back. We have a theater here, a drive-in theater here in Oregon called the 99W, and they are reopening this weekend. With everything going on in the world, they were able to come up with a way to safely reopen. They have to limit how many people they let in, and you have to make reservations and all that. But to kick things off, they're showing the new Trolls movie, and that's not my bag, man.
Right.
And I get that, whatever. But they aren't allowed to bring in as many people as they want to, and they need to ensure that they have enough people coming in, so they've got to bring in a big budget film. Sam Sherman, however, has been making noise online about making Dracula versus Frankenstein available to drive-ins again. It's like a road picture,
right?
Which I would love to see at a drive-in setting. Awesome. Would a drive-in movie theater around here play it? I don't know.
Yeah.
But I would love to see it, man. I think that for now, for people who want to see a monster or just see a movie in general, the drive-in is probably your safest bet. Will that continue once we kind of get a handle on what's going on in the world today? I don't know. I would love to see it happen.
Yeah. It's really,
but who knows,
it's really
man?
difficult because, what kind of killed them was the property taxes got too high back in the 80s, and then they just couldn't afford it anymore, and they weren't always playing first run films. Now most of them are, but that helps keep it going. I mean, we've got like 4 drive-ins I think in Maine here, and there's a couple in New Hampshire and one in Mass, and they've all been thriving for the last few years. So it just needs a boost. If a few other people can get out there and put a few more up, it'd be awesome.
That's fantastic, man. And when the studios decided to go all digital, and that killed a handful of drive-in movie theaters too, because suddenly they can't show film prints anymore because Universal doesn't make those available, or Paramount or MGM or whoever.
Right. You
had to go all digital. I don't. Do you remember that happening a few years ago when that happened? And there's this big push to kind of help drive-ins get the digital projectors. The 99W is one of the ones that got one from that contest that Honda was running or whatever. But even in that case, where they were awarded a digital projector, the 99W still had to sink a bunch of money into updating the projection booth, because suddenly you have these huge high-tech machines that are so much hotter. They generate so much more heat than just an old projector. Despite the projector having this huge bulb or whatever, these computerized systems suddenly require ventilation and cooling and all that. So even if they got the projector handed to them, they had to upgrade their ventilation and everything else. And it just cost so many of these theaters so much money to do it.
Right. Oh, so upwards of like 80,000, I've heard.
Yeah. It was nuts. So I'm sure that really kind of hurt some of these places too. Property taxes, people wanting to do different things with the space.
Right.
The drive-in here, I mean, it's a nice lot. It's not one of the bigger drive-in lots, but it's a nice lot. But I can imagine somebody looking at that and saying that'd be a perfect place for a couple of stores, maybe a strip mall.
Yeah.
That sort of thing, and make more money on a regular basis, because the drive-in's only open on the weekends. And it's only open a few months out of the year.
Well, it's true. It's definitely seasonal around here as well in Maine. When I look at a golf course, I think of how many drive-in screens I could put up.
Yeah. I have this fantasy, and I don't think it'll ever come true, but I used to think that my perfect retirement job would be to own a drive-in movie theater.
Yeah.
Just because I feel like it's so important to hold on to that. It was such a unique experience in American pop culture. And it was also big down in Australia for some reason. It was kind of big down there too, but it's almost strictly an American thing.
Yeah.
And I wish we had it.
I know.
To kind of go back to my film school days, when I was driving to go to film school, I was driving from Cheyenne, Wyoming to Bozeman, Montana. I could make that drive in about 10, 11 hours, right? And
wow.
I would always think that I'd get up early in the morning and drive all the way through, but, never did. I got real close to the border between Wyoming and Montana and thought, okay, I just got to call it. It's just too late. I got to find somewhere to sleep. I didn't want to check into a hotel because that was a little bit more expensive than what I had money for. But this small town had a drive-in movie theater. And they were doing a from dusk till dawn screening for like $20. You come in and watch whatever movies, all the movies they were showing all day, all night until the following morning. And I thought, you know what? That's what I'm doing. So I didn't stay in a hotel that night. I pulled into the drive-in and I fell asleep watching Die Hard 3 at the drive-in. And the next morning around 6, 7 o'clock, I woke up and drove out and kept on going to film school.
That's awesome, dude. Oh, my God. That is so cool. So, all right. So what have you got coming up for anything we should be looking out for above and beyond just the Monster Kid new episodes?
Yeah, so new episodes of Monster Kid Radio every Thursday, late Wednesday night, Thursday mornings when they're typically available. If you subscribe to them through iTunes or whatever, you're going to get your every episode, or YouTube. They're always going to be there for you. And, of course, you can go back into the archives and listen to all the previous episodes, too. Like I said, I've got the new Mark Temple book that'll be coming out later this year, and then the book that I'm doing with Pro Se as well. The YouTube stuff's going to get a little bit beefier as well. And then every Saturday I've been doing these screenings.
Oh, yes.
And I'm probably going to keep those going as well, even once things kind of normalize in the world. I'd like to keep them going for a while. We call it right now Social Distance Saturday, but hopefully we won't have to keep socially distant forever.
Right.
But basically what I do is Monster Kid Radio has a Twitch stream now over at twitch.tv/Monster Kid Radio. And every Saturday for a good 9, 10, 11 hours, I'm showing movies. And there's a live chat going. It's usually public domain stuff because, I want to keep it all above board and legal and all that. But there's some great public domain monster movies out there and horror movies out there. So, we're doing that every weekend. Typically starts around 11 a.m. Pacific, where I start like a pre-show, typically about an hour. And then around noon, again, Pacific, the movies start. And it's a nonstop run of classic and sometimes not so classic genre cinema. A couple of TV shows, maybe a music video, and tons of trailers. And we've had so many people pop into the Twitch, and the conversation... the movies are great, but the conversation's so much better. It's just fun to hang out with your fellow Monster Kids from around the world. I know we've got people down in Mexico that come in and hang out with us while we do that. And it's free. So if you want to pop on over, join us every Saturday. We'll be there.
And that's awesome, Derek. It's just such a service, but it's also getting the Monster Kids together, keeping it alive, keeping the discussion going. It's more than just us all watching creature features on a Saturday afternoon. It's like now we can participate and discuss with other people. And I think that's just wonderful what you're doing there.
Oh, yeah, and it's fun for me to kind of program this stuff. I spend maybe about a day and a half, and I probably shouldn't. I should be doing other things with my time, but I spend about a day and a half programming the event, programming the weekend, just trying to find stuff that not everybody's seen. Because there's some real gems out there that if you go looking, you're going to find some really cool stuff. There's an old TV show called One Step Beyond.
Yes.
It's an anthology show, and it's in the public domain, and every weekend I try to play an episode of that, and that's usually one of the things that gets the biggest reception. The best reception is an episode of One Step Beyond. I'll spend hours putting together 5-6 hours worth of movies, and this 22-minute episode of a TV show gets the best response. So, you never know what you're going to find if you go digging for it.
That's awesome, dude. So good.
And we do try to play a couple of rounds of the Classic 5 during these as well. Because there's this live chat, I'll come on and use what my wife calls God voice, where I just kind of start talking to people through the stream. And I'll pull some cards from the Classic 5 deck, and we'll start playing a little bit of the Classic 5. So that'll be something that we do too. And we have some new versions of the Classic 5 coming out too. We've got some new decks, some new expansions coming up. We've got the Kaiju expansion deck, which I've never made available for sale anywhere. That'll be coming up here and available for people. And you can pick that up over at tinyurl.com/classic5.
Excellent. That's wonderful, man. So good. So one last thing is I'm going to mention, but I'm actually not going to mention it, is that you and I have got another episode on a different show that we're going to do, and that's coming up. I just want to keep it a surprise just for now for the audience, but I hope everyone looks forward to seeing what it's going to be. And Derek, it's been a real honor to have you on the show, and we hope you come back again on Then Is Now.
Oh, I'd love to. We didn't even talk about a 6-week rotation or anything else I've got come up. So, yeah, we'll use that for a part 2.
Excellent. Sounds great, man.
I'm looking forward to our next episode. Listeners, I don't want to spoil it either because Roger said he didn't want to, but I'm looking forward to it, man. It's going to be some good movies that we're going to talk about here soon.
Cool. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you.
Prepare for a spine-tingling, nerve-shattering podcast featuring all your favorite monsters. You won't believe your ears when you listen to Monster Kid Radio. Hear your host, Derek M. Koch, and his ever-rotating stable of guests discuss your favorite classic and sometimes not-so-classic monster movies. Subscribe to Monster Kid Radio through iTunes or Stitcher, or visit monsterkidradio.net before the next weekly episode of Monster Kid Radio. Go through the archives for interviews with Sarah Karloff, Victoria Price, and Joel Hodgson. Listen to the discussions about movies like Creature from the Black Lagoon, Island of Terror, and King Kong. And don't forget convention coverage from Monster Bash and the H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival, Classic Monsters, Modern Talk, and the Head of Rondo Hatton. Only on Monster Kid Radio.
Well, thank you for joining us on this episode of Then Is Now. We really had fun talking to podcasting maestro Derek Koch. We hope you check him out at monsterkidradio.net. He's got a lot of great stuff going on. His show is just fantastic. Okay, so that wraps episode 5 of Then Is Now. We hope you enjoyed it. If you want to give us your feedback on this episode, you can email us at thenisnow42@gmail.com. That's thenisnow42@gmail.com. And if you would rather leave us a voicemail that we can play on the air, then we have a phone number for you to call. It's 978-432-9079. That's 978-432-9079. And once again, we hope you enjoyed this episode. Here at Then Is Now, we love to talk about pop culture from the past, all the cool stuff that you probably missed out on, stuff that you should know. If you go back and listen to our little opening, all those phrases are from movies and TV shows, and they're phrases that everybody should at least know. Okay, so that's it. I'll get off my high horse here now, and we hope to see you again next week, or we hope to hear you, or no, wait. We hope for you to hear us. Anyways, join us next time for episode 6, and we'll have more fun stuff, and maybe you'll learn a thing or two while being entertained. Class dismissed.
Right on, man.